Welcome to Goobertown Hobbies. My name is Brent. Today, I have some amazing 3D printed minis to work with. Amazons. These ladies are super cool. So, let's get to it. A few months ago, I painted my first 3D printed minis, and I was absolutely amazed by the level of detail. I'd been expecting them to be low resolution and have tons of layer lines, but I was very wrong. Modern resin printers can do some really amazing stuff. Beyond that, I really loved the design of these lizard folk. These lizard folk were part of a Kickstarter by Danny Herrero of 3D Printed Tabletop. For Danny's Kickstarter, he employed some talented artists to design a whole smorgasbord of cool minis. Andrea of Artisan Guild was the artist who made these lizard folk. Since that episode, I've gotten the chance to speak with Andrea and to see more of his work, and I continue to be super impressed. Well, it turns out that Andrea's wife Francesca is also an accomplished artist, and she's the other half of the Artisan Guild team. Today, I'm painting some of her sculpts that are part of a new Kickstarter campaign. Look at these gorgeous minis. These are some fit, scary-looking Amazons. The design and the print quality is excellent. The underside of those little noses have actual nostrils. The ears are fully sculpted and anatomically correct. These figures are so detailed and convincing that I found myself staring at their toes to see if they had toenails. I haven't seen a toenail yet, but that might be a limitation of my eyes rather than the model's. I'm gonna keep looking at those toes. So this video is actually a three-way collaboration. Andrea and Francesca don't own a resin printer yet, and neither do I. These were printed by a small company called Excellent Miniatures. Excellent Minis licenses files from artists and prints them out in really stunning detail. The Amazons aren't up on their web store quite yet, they're Kickstarter exclusive for now, but Excellent Minis did send along a few other Artisan Guild sculpts that are currently for sale. The number of people who are interested in these minis is bound to be way higher than the number of folks who actually have access to 3D printers. So, companies like Excellent Minis are definitely worth looking into. I was sent these minis for free, but the prices actually look pretty reasonable. Okay, so Francesca is an incredible sculptor, and Excellent Minis did a great job of printing out these Amazons for me. Now it's my turn. I've got to get some paints out and live up to my part in this collaboration. I got out my airbrush to do the priming. I decided to prime with Badger Stynylrez Flesh Color. Getting flesh color down before clothes is often a convenient painting order, and in this case these ladies are showing a lot of skin, so it's a natural place to start. After priming, I used my airbrush to see if I could do some shading and highlighting on the skin of these minis. If you've been watching this channel for a little while, you know that I love using Liquitex white ink to do a zenithal highlight after I prime a mini. I'm doing that here, but this time I'm using an extremely light touch. I'm not just trying to get my light and dark values established in the undercoat, I'm trying to actually highlight the skin tone. After the white ink, I loaded up my airbrush with transparent burnt sienna ink. I'm using this red-brown color to do an anti-zenithal spray, hitting the models from underneath to add shadows. If I use too much of this, that's fine too, because then the model will just appear to have a darker or more tanned complexion. I'd seen this anti-zenithal strategy used by Sam Lenz on his Twitch stream and on Uncle Adam's Tabletop Minions channel, but I hadn't tried it out for myself yet. This seemed like a really good opportunity, and I'm pumped with how it came out. It was so quick and easy, and I think this is an excellent start for the skin tone. At Gen Con this year, I took a class on painting skin tones from Ben Carver. He gave a few rules of thumb that really stuck with me. For the flesh midtone, paint whatever color you want. For the highlights, incorporate the color of the lights that are shining on the figure. If the character is in white sunlight, highlight up towards white. For the shadows, darken the flesh tone and incorporate a bit of the color of the character's blood. I'd never heard those skin painting tips before, and I thought they were really interesting. So, these Amazons are in sunlight, they get highlighted up towards white with that white ink. They're humans with red blood, so that red-brown ink should add some natural-looking shadows to their flesh. Anyway, I took that advice from Sam and Ben, and here we are. The next thing I did was to add a wash to the flesh. After I hit the models with a gloss varnish to protect the delicate layers of ink, I came in with Army Painter Flesh Tone Wash. While we're doing shoutouts, I'm pretty sure I saw the gloss varnish followed by Army Painter Wash for the first time on Next Level Painting with Kenny Boucher, and it's a trick that I really do like. Okay, I think that's enough shoutouts for now, back to painting Amazons. That flesh wash slides nicely over the gloss varnish. It did a pretty good job of tinting everything one shade darker and blending those transitions from the airbrush. It also picked out some of the recesses. Ultimately, these models have a lot of smooth, firm curves, so the flesh wash wasn't as useful as if there had been more cuts or folds, but I think it was still a useful step. In a few of the broad open areas, there was a bit of staining from the wash, but overall, the wash did improve the situation. Big picture, we've got a really good start on the flesh. I hit the models with a matte varnish to give the paint a good surface to stick to, then it was time for some other colors. From here on out, I'm going to be careful to try to protect those effects that we've established on the skin. Next up is the main clothing color. I decided on Viking Blue from Army Painter. It's a bold, fun shade of blue, it has nice coverage, and it complements the skin tone quite nicely. The choice to use blue was probably the biggest choice that I had to make in this painting process. It really sets the tone for the final look of the minis. In my mind, Amazons have bright, fun colors, so I could have gone in a lot of directions with this. Another consideration for me is varying up the colors that I use in these videos. That keeps the painting fresh for you and for me. In the end, I love this shade of blue. I don't use it enough, and it fits the minis, so there we go. Normally at this stage in painting, I find all the mold lines that I missed while I was cleaning and assembling the model. For these minis, there were no layer lines and certainly no mold lines. In a few places, I could see where the 3D printed supports had been, but overall, it's really nice to work with a model that's completely free of mold lines. Continuing on, it was time for the various logical browns and tans and grays to fill in some of the other details. For this phase of base coating, I'm starting to really like the extra opaque line of paints from Vallejo. Presumably, these are similar to the base paints from GW, mini paints formulated to give excellent coverage. I'm not too fussed with exactly what shade of tan or gray I'm using for straps and wraps and boots. I just want nice coverage and colors that make sense. This set of 16 colors was suggested in the comments section of an earlier video, and it's really become a go-to for getting models base coated faster using fewer layers of paint. So I went back through the Goobertown library of videos. I've had 11 painting videos where I've painted only male minis, 3 videos where I've painted both male and female minis, and 1 video where I painted a single female mini. There's a can of worms here that I have no intention of opening today, but I find myself really wanting to paint more female minis. In my life, I have no doubt that I've painted more male minis than female minis. I played Fantasy Orcs back as a schoolboy, and those are all lads, boys. I also played Dark Eldar for 40k. That army does have female warriors, but even so, the old Dark Eldar warrior sprue was 75% male. The first time I went to Gen Con was really eye-opening for me. First, I realized how many mini companies were out there other than Games Workshop. I also realized how many awesome female minis are out there. A lot of female minis really draw me in, probably just because I spent so much of my time painting dudes. Well, now I have a variety of female minis in my queue, and some of them are projects that I'm really looking forward to. Now, these Amazons are some gorgeous ladies. Fit, dangerous, and dressed for the tropics. You've probably noticed that I keep things pretty clean here in Goobertown. For the most part, it's PG with maybe a little more blood splatter. There are some awesome minis for sale out there which just aren't appropriate to feature on Goobertown. Some figures are a bit too fit and too gorgeous and dressed too much for the tropics for the type of videos that I want to make. Anyway, I think these 3 Amazons are appropriate for the Goobertown that we're building here, but the Spearwoman with the Mortal Kombat dress is maybe approaching that line. That being said, I'm thoroughly enjoying painting these, and I think that they're coming along really nicely. As I was painting, I was thinking about how I wanted to base them. Excellent Minis did send along some 3D printed bases, which look pretty cool. I could go even simpler and just use plain black bases. Or I could make some jungle bases. I'm not up on Amazon lore and legend, but I think of them generally being set in South or Central America. Rainforests, Mayan temples, that sort of thing. Maybe the actual Amazon River. Then an idea came to me. A canoe full of Amazons heading out to raid a neighboring village. Vikings had long ships and hairy men. These Amazons have canoes and fit women. Did the shade of Viking blue put this idea into my head? Or are Vikings always at the surface of my creative mind? Either way, the idea has taken root. Let's make some Amazon canoe Vikings. Last summer, I went to the lake on a vacation. In addition to doing a bit of canoeing, a bit of filming, and a bit of painting, I also collected some raw hobby materials. From dead trees and on the forest floor, I found some birch bark. I didn't know quite what I was going to do with it, but a birch bark canoe did cross my mind at the time. Well, here we are. We have some dangerous ladies who need a canoe for raiding and pillaging. Do birch trees grow in the rainforest? I don't know, but let's not worry about it. I decided to make a decorative base where the Amazons have landed their canoe and are about to go mess up somebody's day. I got an oval of MDF from the craft store. I also found a little canoe Christmas tree ornament, and I used that to think about sizing and patterning. I could have just used that ornament in the build, but nah, let's build a canoe. The base will have jungle, a bit of water, a canoe, and some Amazons. The trick is to find a way to get all that stuff onto the base while still drawing attention to the minis. I used some DOS clay to build up a bit of a riverbank. I want just a bit of water on the back edge of the base and the canoe to be pulled up on the shore. The warriors will be striding into the jungle, maybe to go steal their neighbors' goats and such. For the canoe, I made a pattern out of printer paper. I got the rough dimensions from tracing that Christmas ornament, and then I cut it down to have a sleeker appearance. Once it seemed about right, I folded it into shape and I glued the bow and the stern. The idea was to layer on thin strips of birch bark, gluing them directly to the paper frame. This took a bit of experimenting. Part of the trick was getting the birch bark to peel into usable slices. I also needed to figure out how to glue it to the paper without completely distorting the boat's shape. At first, I used a lot of paper clips to keep everything in place while the glue set. Although at first the birch bark tried to twist the paper into new shapes, after a while the boat started to firm up and the bark gave it some rigidity. In the worst case scenario, I could always cut this footage and just use that Christmas ornament, but then the boat started to shape up into something reasonable. I finished it off with a single piece of bark as decking to hide the seams in the remaining paper. It actually looks pretty good. As for the base, once the DOS clay riverbank was dry, I slapped on some PVA glue and covered it with really fine sand. I wasn't going for a sandy texture exactly, I mostly just wanted to hide my fingerprints in the clay. Once that was dry, I primed the base brown with my airbrush. I used a few different shades of brown to add some variety to the jungle floor, and to make the riverbank a different shade of mud. I did a quick test run of the minis, the base, and the canoe, and I think that we might really be onto something here. I started to add some Vallejo water texture to the back corner of the base. I also added in a few drops of brown wash to muddy up the river a bit. I ended up doing 2 shallow pours of this water effect. Someday, I'll try a 2-part resin for some awesome water effects, but that day is not today. Anyway, let's get back to painting. I'd been putting off deciding hair colors, but the time has come. Just to get myself a bit more practice, I decided on 3 different colors: blondish, brownish, and blackish. Like almost everything else on the Amazons, I used that high opacity Vallejo set to get the base coats on. I kept working, getting more and more details, as well as starting to apply some washes to the hair, straps, and wraps. Like I said earlier, these minis were sculpted by Francesca at Artisan Guild. Artisan Guild is a husband and wife team. They're both incredible artists with a bunch of experience sculpting for larger companies. Artisan Guild is entirely their creation though, and in just a few months they've become a major name in the realm of 3D printed minis. Danny assures me that this is a true statement. Primarily, Artisan Guild is a Patreon campaign with monthly releases of collections of sculpts ready to be printed. Each month has a different theme, and even if you don't have a 3D printer, it's worth checking out some of the cool sculpts that they've designed. Orc Month, Dwarf Month, Vampire Month, Fighters Guild Month, and so on. Lots of cool stuff. Artisan Guild also license out their designs to third parties like Excellent Miniatures to print and sell. So if you really like an Artisan Guild model but you don't have a printer, you can probably find a legal and ethical way to buy that mini. The minis from this Amazon's Kickstarter will also be licensed out eventually, so depending on when you watch this video, you might already be able to buy them. Or, depending on when you watch this video, you might be able to support that Kickstarter. Kickstarter has tons of Amazons and monsters and terrain other than the 3 models that I'm painting today. I'm posting this video about 1 week into the campaign. The Kickstarter is, unsurprisingly, doing really well. It was fully funded in the first day, and now it's just a question of how many stretch goals will be unlocked. I don't have any financial relationship with Artisan Guild, I just think they're doing great work and I'd like to see them succeed. From a more selfish standpoint, some of the concept art for the stretch goal minis is really outstanding and I'm hoping they get unlocked. So if you have a 3D printer, definitely consider getting into this, and if you don't have a printer yet, maybe now's the time. I've almost entirely talked myself into getting a 3D printer at this point, and there's a few stretch goals that I really want to see. So, if you're watching in October of 2019, let's try to unlock that priestess riding the panther. And if you're watching far in the future, thanks for bearing with us, we're done talking about this old Kickstarter. Back to painting, it's time to do the eyes. I need to hold the minis up really close to my own eyes to paint them, and I haven't figured out a great way to film that yet. But I started with beige. The detail is so fine on these minis that the eyelids really frame the eyeballs and make it a bit easier than normal to get the paint to flow into proper eye shape. Of course, I still make some mistakes, but I'll neaten that up later. I actually decided to try color irises on these ladies. Green, violet, and brown. For these, I'm trying to fill in most of the eye while leaving a sliver of white sclera to either side. The archer has her eyes open just wide enough that I even decided to try to paint pupils. A tiny dot in the middle of each iris. Well, it's not amazing with this high-resolution camera, but in person, it actually looks pretty cool. Okay, a few more details to get to. I recently bought a couple of cheap makeup brushes because I heard that they're really good for dry brushing. I gave them a shot to start highlighting the hair, and indeed they seem to work pretty well. I'll have to spend more time mastering their use, but it's an intriguing start with these brushes. I kept doing some highlights, but we're definitely getting close here. When I'm painting a mini, there comes a point when I think, this is looking pretty cool. I could call this model done if I wanted to. I find that after that thought runs through my head, I start getting excited and impatient and really want to call the model complete. These models are definitely starting to look cool, and I'm starting to get antsy. It's tempting to put them down and declare victory, but let's just keep it together for a few more steps. It's time to shade and highlight the blue cloth. I used Blue Tone from Army Painter to pin wash some of the folds and creases. I also put it on some surfaces that would be shadowed. I really like that original Viking blue, so I decided not to do an overall wash on the cloth. Then, I pulled in some lighter blue to highlight the raised edges. Again, I'm leaving a lot of that original blue, I just wanted to pick out a few folds and call it good. One last step for each warrior. Tattoos and war paint and such. The spear woman got green tattoos on the scalp and the shoulder. The sword woman used ashes as war paint on her face and legs. The archer was going to have red war paint, but it ended up looking more like scratches, so it's scratches instead. She's been doing some bushwhacking and got her face and leg all scratched up. Or maybe she just thwapped herself in the face with that bowstring of hers. Anyway, my self-control is used up, the models are done. Let's celebrate. Oh yeah, this is gonna be cool. Look at them go. I didn't think about how they'd paddle that canoe, but whatever, this looks awesome. Okay, I sealed the models with matte varnish and put them on black bases briefly just to see how they'd look as figures for gaming or whatnot. Overall, pretty good. It'd be fun to print out a warband of these. They'd make pretty fearsome villains in a D&D campaign. I'm sure there are plenty of ways to fit them into a whole bunch of different games. Ordinarily, I'd do a bit more of a post-mortem on what I like and don't like about each model. I could talk about how cool this undercut hairstyle is, and about how the tattoos on the scalp make it look even better, but we're just getting to the good part. It's time to put the diorama together. I've got the oval of riverbank, I've got the canoe, and I've got some Amazons. I've also got a bag full of basing materials. I've got dried moss and flowers and other plants from the craft store. I've got cedar bark from the woodpile. I've got seashells. I also have some grass tufts and flock. Let's see what we can do. I started off with a bit of green paint dabbed randomly on the jungle floor. Then I started gluing down cedar bark and dried moss and other plant stuff. The foreground is supposed to be the forest. The background is supposed to be a muddy, murky river with tons of floating plants. In between the two, I used some grass tufts on the shore. That canoe isn't amazing, but it looks like it floats at least. Maybe these ladies are going to raid their neighbors for chickens and goats and stuff. And maybe, while they're pillaging, they'll find a better canoe and they'll head out on a sweet new ride. I really do think that the canoe is an awesome detail, but it also causes some problems in centering the figures nicely. It makes sense for the canoe to be perpendicular to the water as it was drawn up on land, but it does constrain where the models can stand. I think I found a decent compromise. I think the scene looks cool, but it doesn't frame the minis as well as some decorative bases do. Ultimately, the best viewing angle for this diorama is a bit off-center with the shape of the oval base. Maybe I should have used a circular base. Oh well, the oval seemed like a good idea at the time. I added as many types of plants as I could to make this place really lush and overgrown. I even pulled out my jar of tiny seashells and I added a few freshwater mussels and clams at the water's edge. And here we are. I really love it. When I started painting these Amazons, I knew that they were awesome figures and that I needed to do something cool with them. I came up with this idea for Canoe Viking Amazons and I think it came together really well. Let's bask in it for a moment. In other news, people have been signing up for the Goobertown Patreon. Like, a lot, and that's amazing. So, forgive me for gushing for just a moment. I set a goal of 75 patrons to unlock a massive army painting project, and we met that in almost exactly 24 hours. Wow, thank you. A massive army is now under construction for an epic Goobertown video. Patrons can check out the first time-lapse shot from that project. I also set a much higher patron goal for a secret massive terrain project. I'm hoping that we meet that goal, but I'm also hoping it takes a few months to get there to give me a bit of time to finish off that army first. The most exciting news is that people seem pumped to participate in the Goobertown Roulette League. The patrons have been grabbing random minis and rolling dice. Just yesterday, I got the first entry in my mailbox and that makes me so happy. Keen rolled a yellow villain, and he drew a sculpt of Radagast the Brown. Well, this isn't Radagast, this is Festigren. Here's the backstory. Festigren was once a reclusive and benevolent druid, living out in the wildlands and caring for the sylvan creatures in the Grey Woods. But a few years ago, he came into contact with the Darkroot, which twisted his mind and blackened his soul. Now he stalks the Grey Woods, slaying travelers and woodsmen that dare enter. A time may come when he and his flock of corrupted animals invade neighboring villages, stamping out the human blight at its source. The model looks good. The color and the grass kind of make him look like a hero rather than a villain. At first I thought he looked a bit too bright and happy, but maybe that's what a twisted druid of nature looks like. He's still out in the sunshine after all. I really like the idea that he's still on his downward arc, twisting away from what he had been. He started doing evil things in the name of protecting the wilds, but his truly monstrous acts are still in the future. Goobertown Roulette is awesome, give it a shot sometime. Evil Yellow Radagast, such a fun prompt. You never know what you'll get. The Goobertown Roulette League is meant to be a quarterly event, but I was so excited that people were actually jumping in that I had to share the first submission right away. Alright, let's close it up here. Awesome models, janky canoe, pretty cool scene. I'm feeling good. Well, there we go. Doing this collaboration was an absolute pleasure, and I'm still just excited I was able to get early access to those minis. They are truly outstanding. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do me a favor, like, subscribe, comment, tell a friend, all that good stuff. I'm going to leave links down below so that you can check out those minis, and I'm also going to leave a link to my Patreon page if you want to learn more about what's going on over there. Okay, that's it for this time. As always, thank you so much for watching.